Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi, and we're here to discuss the cognitive function stack of the ESFJ and the ENFJ personality type. Through Dario Nardi's research that he did by analyzing the CPA, which is known as Keys to Cognition for us millennials who have taken his test, he did a scientific analysis of the results of that instrument and came up with some really interesting data. And he saw that there were two main cognitive function stacks for the types. And he's here today to share with us some of his discoveries from this tool. So, well, Dario, welcome. And I'm curious if you could let us know a little bit about this whole endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know folks may have heard this in some of the other videos, but it bears repeating, especially if you're starting here, that this is based on data from the Keys to Cognition assessment, which has been around for almost 20 years. And I'm working with, in fact, the people doing most of the work are Dr. Mina Barmani at Johns Hopkins University and two fellow faculty of hers there. One of whom is just doing the statistical analysis, like blindly, and then sending that to us, so that we're really getting like a very frank picture of what we have. I think the other thing that's important to mention is this is not something like Myers-Briggs questionnaire, where you have like A or B. Are you sensing or intuiting, judging, perceiving, and the answers are like 16 personalities or whatnot. It's not like that. It's just the 8 functions. That's all we're looking at. And each function people can rate individually, from not like me to exactly me and somewhere in between. So it really is a nice, it turns out to be very nice support. Yes, these are 8 very distinct clusters, absolutely validating Jung's framework of 8 functions. And then there's essentially, beyond that, when we start talking about, well, like, what is the function stack after that? The tricycle model, which has appeared in Mina's earlier analysis of the majors PTI, which is also very rigorously developed type assessment. Now, you're not going to find that free on the internet if you're listening, because it's like actually developed by statisticians and has a lot of research and is a business. But the majors PTI is very legit, and it also shows what's called this tricycle model, which means that the first function and the second function and the sixth function are usually what are the strongest, like those 3 things. And there's a variation of it that brings in all 4 functions, essentially saying like, regardless of what sensing feeling type you are, you're going to be developing different facets of sensing and feeling before everything else. So this really like explodes the theoretical model, which, by the way, Jung did not advocate. It's not from Jung. It's not even from John Beebe, who this theoretical model that people are used to looking at, because he said the numbering system 1 through 8 is just there for convenience of referencing. And we have to remember that we live in a context of, in like physical environment, different cultures, different upbringing, the career stuff that we repeat day to day. I would be very surprised if, since we're talking about ESFJs and ENFJs, if an ENFJ actress is going to have, as I know from neuroscience, the same brain wiring or the same kinds of answers, the same stack as an ENFJ who is a nutritional biochemist, which is what my mom was in the second half of her life, not in the first half. She was comparative literature major out of college and did more of that in the first half of life, versus an ENFJ who's like the CEO of like a social welfare organization, versus one who's maybe a therapist or does something, or a professional psychic, as it happens, got in one of the brain imaging folks who came in. So we expect to see different stacks, and that's what we see. And mostly when we look at the data, again, we're talking about tens of thousands of people, potentially, minimum many thousands of people who are responding the same way. So the ENFJs, there's really sort of like 2 different versions of ENFJ, 2 clusters, and the same for ESFJ. And those two clusters don't describe all ENFJs or all ESFJs. They describe like 5 out of 6. And then there's like 1 out of 6 ENFJs is just like, yeah, I'm completely different than all the others. And 1 out of 6 ESFJs is like, yeah, I'm just completely different than all of the others. So keep in mind as we listen and we explore, these two clusters are not trying to describe it. They're not like smaller boxes. They're just statistical clusters that many thousands of people responded the same way. So there's got to be something to it.
Yeah, these are the statistical clusters that the types fall into. There are so many people who report these cognitive function trends. There has to be something behind this in some way. So
Yeah.
it's not just an accident or some other thing. So.
Yeah, it's not that every person, like, people like, oh, they don't really know themselves, they're not good at introspection. When you have something like 20,000 people responding exactly the same way, are they really all wrong in exactly the same way, or are they trying to tell us something? And oh, I should mention, and I know we've mentioned this before, that the assessment asks about skillful use, and we've talked about role play. This idea that, say, an ENFJ is going to role play extroverted thinking to the extent that's needed in order to meet their needs, their ENFJ needs, and then beyond that, they're like, okay, I'm done with this extroverted thinking. So these are just skill development. Jung even talked about the difference between concrete versus abstract use of a skill, not concrete function, sensing, abstract function, intuiting. He said every single function has an abstract and a concrete use. The concrete use is like basic use. And I think that's what we're seeing here and in a lot of them when people talk about like they've developed some skills, some proficiency, is that they have like really good basic use. And in our culture, a lot of we have to have basic use of extroverted thinking. Like there's just no way around it.
Yeah, it's true. You have to learn certain things to fit into the culture. Yeah, and so it's cool that the data that you've collected and analyzed is very statistically significant, and we're here to look over the results. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear the two variations of ESFJ and your thoughts.
Yeah. So let's jump into that. So there are these two clusters, and so far in the series, I've noticed that the clusters tend to be like one version, say, of ESFJ that's more holistic, and another version that's more analytic, and that sort of connects it to the brain imaging. But let's just talk about it. So the one version of ESFJ is good, of course, with extroverted feeling and introverted sensing. But they also have this other side, these other functions that they rate highly: extroverted sensing and extroverted thinking, in terms of skillful use. And we understand this because in everyday life and in the job world, even if extroverted thinking is not your thing at all and is supposed to be shadow function, person's going to pull in some skills from that. So this person is this sort of holistic ESFJ. They have this FESI SE is like their main little troika. They're outgoing, they're socially responsible, but they're also doers. And there's this sort of present moment awareness, like, oh, these people need attention right in front of me. This is what I'm gonna do. And then an awareness of the established norms, the introverted sensing, like, this is what I'm gonna do and how I'm gonna do it. Um, and then they're going to bring in some order and some efficiency when needed, because the extroverted thinking is like is sort of in there, like in the middle. Um, these folks are not good at what would be ENTP or INTP. So they basically, as we've seen with many of the types we've talked about, they specialize in their function pair, sensing, feeling, and then they got like a dash of extroverted thinking. I would say that these are the ESFJs that can look like ESFPs. And that's like a quick way of understanding them. I would say in practice, they're going to be in like people focused, service oriented roles, of course. But there's going to be this institutional element, but also where you have to respond quickly. So it's not like sitting behind a desk. It's a teacher in a classroom. It's a healthcare worker who's on the hospital floor. It's hospitality, where you actually have customers who are coming to you and you need to respond to them quickly. They might be in the performing arts also. There are established ways of doing things and you learn routines, but you also need to be like on the ball and working with others and probably improvising to some extent as well. I think we could see them in maybe community organization. Uh, it's just that, again, they're not going to be behind a desk, that they just need to be doing stuff. So rallying people to do something, going to events, organizing events and going to them. Whatever need emerges, like quickly responding to those. So that's all of a sudden we're like, oh wow, ESFJ is like really cool. Like imagine this person who runs all of these like community events for fundraising, for example, for helping their community or helping a cause. And they're going to be warm and responsive. And they're also going to be, I think, some pragmatic in the moment. The difficulty is seen beyond that. That what, say, an INTP, their opposite type would specialize in, which is like standing back, just observing, being objective and impersonal, like analyzing the situation in terms of mental models and trying to improve upon this. That's so like not this. This is like the exact. It's not going to be the ESFJ that gets interested in academic stuff early. No, they're all about doing stuff and meeting people's needs practically. So they have the short-term bias, could be over accommodating. And I think stress-wise, and we haven't talked about stress with the other ones, but I think I'd like to. I mean, it's an important thing. Because when I hear from ESFJs, a lot of them say, I feel really stressed out. I spend so many of my days and I'm exhausted. I mean, I'm literally thinking of a conversation with an ESFJ. She's like, there's stuff to do for my family and even to do for work. And I work after dinner and I'm at the computer, even if it's not that long, to make sure the next day the stuff is ready. Then I have kids and other people to take care of, and I'm doing the laundry at like 11 at night. And then they're like, where do I even get time for me? Um, so I think that they can suffer from burnout, and because they're the kind of person that's going to be on the job floor, like on the hospital floor, in the hospitality, like, going here and there, they're putting out fires like all the time. Um, and I think that putting out fires can be stressful. So that's like one version of ESFJ, and I'm hoping that the statistics and why I've spent time to really describe them is to like breathe life into ESFJ descriptions. And they're unlike some of the stereotypical stuff that we see on the internet about this type.
Yeah, this is the ESFJ with strong sensing and feeling functions with a dash of extroverted thinking, so they
Mhm.
can get confused with ESFPs, like you said, because it's not spoken that ESFJs tend to have, like, they can be good at some TE stuff if they put their mind to it. So, like we talked about before, if the extroverted feeling, the hero extroverted feeling approves of the uses of extroverted thinking to get their aims met, then they will do it. They will play whatever they need to achieve that end aim of their hero function.
Yeah, yeah. And if we're wondering, sort of because you and I are both dominant NI types, just to go on a slight detour for a moment, where do we use introverted sensing? I think it works out the same way. And we'll look to things like the past or what seems to work, or just even moments. Like I can imitate ISTJ in order to get things done really efficiently and quickly, just following the standard operating procedures. Okay, this is what I need to do. This is what people are expecting. This is the timetable I'm supposed to follow. I do find it stressful, but if I really need to pay attention to those details and do like the literature search and comparisons and stuff like that, then I can do that. But it's in service of that NI vision of a project. And
Mm.
probably for INFJ, it's attending to people's small likes and dislikes, which ISFJs do very well, and also ESFJ. It's like, oh yeah, you like this, and that's like, oh, that's a touchy subject for you, and oh, you this is something you really enjoy, and they remember all of those little things, which I'm terrible at, by the way. Um, but INFJ, I think, has this way of being like good hosts, and attending to those details when it serves building and growing the relationship. I'm just suspecting. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about the other version of ESFJ. How does that look?
Yeah. So this version, that we call the Analytic ESFJ, easily mistaken for ESTJ. That they have that tricycle model, but the TE is even stronger. It's not in the middle. It's right up there up front. It's almost like there are two front seat drivers. And so this version of ESFJ makes them more directive, more efficiency driven. They're more likely to be in like a structured leadership role, administrator, manager, project coordinator, where other people are expecting them to behave a certain way. They can't be as impulsive. They're not putting out fires necessarily. They're not on the ground directly dealing with clients or patients or customers. They're much more in that, maybe not back office, but needing to make those decisions and organize things. I suspect what happens with ESFJs, one, they go through the school system and they're learning they need to do extroverted thinking. Then they get into the job environment and they want to do their extroverted feeling stuff. But as they get promoted over time, they discover more and more that they need to do TE, which is counter to what they would normally do. So okay, we're going to bring this in, and this is why they'll look like an ESTJ until you really talk to them and profile them carefully. Where they're weakest in is just intuiting in general. So this is the administrator or the manager, project coordinator, professional, that if you want them to embrace change, pretty much the only pathway is going to be appealing to helping people. They've already so stressed out and so extended themselves into doing the efficiency and the planning and the effectiveness that there's not a lot of room for things like brainstorming. So this is actually, and I've encountered this in the business world, that with SFJs, they really can get very, very anchored in, this is how we're going to do it. And there's no appeal with intuiting extroverted or introverted to get them out of that. Because they're almost like, and I see it, they're like, I don't trust anything else. I'm just going to hang on to what I know works, and go with that. So even their use of extroverted thinking can seem fairly rigid compared to an actual ESTJ, who is much more likely to be dynamic and trust, oh, I'm bringing in my extroverted intuiting with the extroverted thinking, and we're going to muck it up a little bit and play with things and see what happens. This ESFJ is not going to do that. I still think, though, of course, the interpersonal connection is how you make it work with them. And they're going to be very interested in things like policy implementation, corporate training, especially if it's a larger company, how do we move the culture of the organization? Because still there is that extroverted feeling, and it will always be around values, not around division. And in fact, if you ask them about the vision, they're just going to parrot back what they've heard, which is already decided by committee or something like that. And that's I think that a good example of this, my personal opinion, is that Joe Biden is ESFJ. Keeping in mind that he's not going to be your 20-year-old textbook ESFJ, because he's not 20. But he has a whole life and documentation. And I think he's a good example of this analytic ESFJ, that this is what people will see. And I think it's a good example of, and I don't mean the version that we got in the last year or two where he was obviously in cognitive decline. That's not a fair example. But think in the middle of his career, he was very much known as a get things done through people kind of person, while working through all of the machinery of government. and by the way, really trusting the machinery of government. And it was always about values, and a little bit of like, oh, what do these people want to hear, and what do those people want to hear? And when you'd ask him for a vision, like long term or strategizing, no, that did not happen. Like, he was not somebody who you would look to or hear about strategy or policy in like a long term, like the way an ENTP or ENTJ, for example, would talk about these. Um, of course, I'm a little bit I'm very much hesitant to type or profile public figures, but I think that this is probably a good example of it. Um, and still, so there, I think another example that could be closer to home would be like a coach or manager in an organization, and they will be usually found in an office or at a desk, and then they go out and give speeches and that kind of thing. They can be seen as over controlling, micromanagement, rigid structures, because they're trying to use TE, but they're bringing it in a way they don't really trust. They're going to be risk adverse rather than visionary. So they're always going to be like what minimizes the risk. Let's stick with the proven approach, just as we would expect, usually with the stereotypical ESFJ. And then again, I think that there can be burnout when there are just too many variables and there's too much change. I think the danger zone for this type is in any kind of fast-paced, changing industry like high tech. They're going to be really, really taxed to survive this. Even though they've been promoted maybe into a role, and then going to be like, like, how am I supposed to manage this? And that's I mean, everybody can be pushed into roles, like INTJs often pushed into roles that are in upper management. We know this from all of the MBTI data that's out there, and yet INTJs don't really care at the end of the day about things like sales and marketing, and even the bottom line. Understand it conceptually, but like, I personally don't. That's not where my heart is or my intuition. So I think we can all be pushed in directions we don't like. Oh, the number in the tech industry of INTPs pushed into management positions, and the INTP is like, I don't want to manage other people. Although I think they can be surprisingly good at it, because they can be quite quiet managers. But when we get to INTPs, we'll talk about that.
Well said. And so this version of ESFJ, is it the more extroverted kind of ESFJ out of the two ESFJs?
Yeah, I would say that there are the more extroverted. Like, they both come off as extroverted in different ways. It's just that the first version, well, and then they are extroverts naturally. The first version is a little bit more in the present moment, having to respond to things as they come up. They're sort of like on the floor, so to speak, with clients and patients and so on. The second version is more in their office. And so I think that second version can come off the analytic one as a little bit more introverted, but I think it's really more about their position and the idea that they're less action oriented and operating a little bit more out of their shadow. Um, and that's I think some other ways we could see it too is like the holistic version will actually have some spiritual interests on the side, for example. Um, Whereas with the analytic version, it's more like the spirituality is clearly and plainly represented in an institutional religious vehicle, rather than, religion is how I fulfill my spirituality, rather than the holistic version where it's just like, oh, religion, spirituality is something that we sort of discover and interact with as we go. And spirituality is something more immediately like organic and responding in the moment and experiential. And I think that's, talking about introverted intuiting and introverted sensing, that what they have in common is they're both what Jung called religious functions. But I would say still overall, like, we follow this pattern, generally speaking, that extroverts tend to have 3 pretty good extroverted functions, period. And then they have 1 or maybe 2 good introverted functions. And then for introverts, most introverts, I'm talking about adults, like say age 35 as a reference. Most introverts have 3 pretty good introverted functions.
Mm.
Like you want me to do introverted intuiting, that happens automatically unless I'm burned out. Introverted feeling for sure is there, especially when I'm under stress. And then introverted thinking is an on-the-job thing. I mean,
Mm.
and I know because it's something I developed in my 20s. Like I was forced to develop it. And then I'm like, oh wow, this TI thing is like really cool. So I think for introverts, they have 3 good introverted functions. I'm not talking about 15-year-olds. I'm talking about like 30, 35 afterward. Um, and then these introverts have maybe 1 or 2 good extroverted functions. And that's what we see in the data. So I think also we need to, and what that is, that varies from one person to the next. Like it's not necessarily decided by their type. It's not like, oh, you're ESFJ, therefore you're good at. Well, of course they're good at extroverted feeling, but what else? TE, NE, SE. Those are the 3 other extroverted functions, and that mix is going to be different for each of them.
Mm. The extroverts tend to be quite good at the extroverted functions, and the introverts tend to be quite good at the introverted functions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of generally figuring out that dimension of your personality.
Hmm.
And I'm curious about ENFJs.
Yeah, yeah, and I would ask just before we go on to ENFJ, just because we're talking about extroverted feeling, and I sort of keep forgetting to do this, is like, what are actually the most statistically powerful questions that resulted in all this like statistical insights? And so when we talk about extroverted feeling, so for ESFJ and ENFJ, FE, what were the top 3 performing items in the questionnaire? Feel inclined to be responsible for and take care of others' feelings. Um, yeah, for you TJ folks out there, you're like, what? The thinking folks in general, but extroverted feeling is the top performing question statistically. Compassionately take on someone else's needs as your own. Help make people feel comfortable by engaging in hosting and caretaking. So those are the 3 items that really capture what people were consistently relating to when they have extroverted feeling is strong. And that's like the essence of extroverted feeling from the assessment. Um, and then for ENFJs, okay, we're carrying that forward, those themes, but of course they're going to show up differently because what pops up for them is introverted intuiting. Um, and for both of them, the 2 versions of ENFJ, we still see extroverted feeling, introverted intuiting, and then their 6th function, extroverted intuiting, is usually in there somewhere. It's not super weak. It's either medium or also strong. But the ENFJ does present, like, this is one of the types. And when we get to ISTP, also, it's another one of the types that presents us with a little bit of like, like, what does this really mean? And how is this showing up? So I'll talk about the first ENFJ of the 2, and this is the one that's like, these are 2/3 of ENFJs. That pretty much they specialize in being NFs. So they have extroverted feeling, introverted intuiting, but also pretty decent at extroverted intuiting and introverted feeling. So they're going to get along with NFPs. They might be mistaken for an ENFP. They might be mistaken, even as we're going to see in a moment, for ESFJ, because what they also have going for them is introverted sensing in terms of skillful use. Otherwise, they do thinking functions terribly, both of them. They're so not the ESFJ we were just talking about. They have no interest in like, okay, we're supposed to be following these like standard operating procedures and rules of effectiveness and what is data driven and empirical. And I mean, they're going to look at that, but what really drives them is this future oriented insight. and then how that connects with their values and motivating people, whether they're leaders or educators or counselors, to be moving towards that vision and that change-oriented, transformational way of thinking about life. Because the NI for this type is very strong, right up there with FE. And they're in roles where I think they usually get to talk about their long-term vision, and inspiring others to move towards those. So community activism. They're going to say we do strategic leadership, but what to them means strategy is I have a vision and I'm organizing people in order to head towards that vision. And that could be something artistic, like theater. It doesn't have to be like a business oriented or community oriented per se. And very just that NF sense of human potential that's there. They could even look like INFJ. And then what we see is this little piece that sticks out, which is why is introverted sensing pretty high for them? And that presents us with a little bit of a puzzle, because that's normally supposed to be like a big blind spot. And in talking about ENFJ, I think this is, we got to understand the ENFJ is very culture oriented. They're an affiliative type in temperament theory. They're an affiliative type. And their extroverted feeling is constantly aware of the fact that they're in a community and in a culture and in a family, and they have all these relationships. Most people aren't like them. Okay, the organization, or even probably the family and certainly the community, are going to be filled with feeling, yes, extroverted feeling, but also extroverted thinking and introverted sensing, because those are the three most common functions in the population: SITEFE. And I'm guessing, because with each ENFJ we're seeing this, that the ENFJ is like, I need to like build a bridge somehow to the community to like fit in and make things work. And this version of ENFJ decides, I'm going to role play introverted sensing. I'm going to role play all of the stuff that comes with introverted sensing. I'm going to be minding what the culture is and what the norms are and what people's expectations are, people's concerns around safety, people's concerns around comfort, which sort of overlaps a little bit with extroverted feeling. Um, and you can see like where introverted sensing and extroverted feeling, every single function overlaps in some ways with every other function. They're going to be like, okay, I'm doing this NF stuff, but I have to build a bridge to my community and my organization, which is why they can look like ESFJ sometimes, like a very idealistic ESFJ. And that can show up in a number of ways. One of them is this trying harder. So because they're stretching into a shadow function, that they're really going to be like, okay, I need, what are they expecting? They're expecting I'm going to have like research details. They're expecting there's going to be like, the presentation is supposed to happen in a certain way. I'm supposed to dress a certain way. I'm supposed to act a certain way, like cultural norms. And some of that overlaps with extroverted feeling. But when we look at introverted sensing, what is introverted sensing about? We've seen this before when we talked about the SI types. Attending to the details in front of you. Do those match what you were accustomed to? Comparing experiences to what's familiar, what's reliable. And I think that this version of, and reviewing a lot of information over time, so they're probably going to do information overkill. In order to be accepted by the community as legitimate about my vision, I need to do like massive amounts of reading and bookwork and document everything. And I think what happens with this type is then, because they're building this bridge with the shadow function, is that it's really stressful and they don't actually make the progress that maybe they need to make. But yet, if they're in positions of authority and they're really trying to make change happen and they want people to be comfortable, this is what they have to do. And I think this is a very disruptive idea, that every one of us, regardless of your type as a listener, you're a certain type, you exist within a context where the types are not represented equally. That for every INFJ out there, there's something literally like 10 to 15 ESTJs. Like, you got to survive in that culture. And if you're an introvert, you can be like, you know what, I'm going to hide in my corner room over here and like do my own thing. And I think IJ types can like slide through life in a certain way, like not ruffling too many feathers. But with ENFJ, their whole drive is to like transform us, the group. And so they have to pay attention to that. And that's just, I think, a lot of stress. It brings them a lot of stress. And they may even be being torn. Like my mom is an example, like she, in the second half of her life, I'm talking about specifically, is she wanted to bring healthcare practices that were really powerful for people that were grounded in science. And yet at the same time, she needed to do everything in a way that would be accepted by the medical community. So everything had to be documented, all of the research done, all of the references listed. Um, and some of that could be sort of chalked up to some extroverted sensing, taking action, but it could never end there. Like hours and hours, like years of work, like reading, researching, making comparisons, like remembering information, and being able to quote back to people. Oh, well, you think like, oh, a study says vitamin D, turns out it's not helpful. And she's like, I have 3 research studies I can turn you to, meta studies that will show that that's wrong. And vitamin D is very important. So this ENFJ is under a lot of pressure. And that's one version of ENFJ.
Interesting. I'm taking that all in. And this version of ENFJ, what is it like? What types are they likely to get mistaken for?
They could be mistaken for ESFJ. They also could be mistaken for another NF type, sort of depending upon what their role is. Even potentially an ENFP, or INFJ. Because they both of the thinking functions are weak, and they don't have any extroverted sensing really that's strongly there. Like they're not a go out and do it, like that holistic version of ESFJ that we heard about. So what's left? And it's going to be either just classic NF with like a dash of introverted sensing, or ESFJ.
Mm. And then when it comes to the other variation of ENFJ.
Yeah, this version is a lot more. So to keep with this bridge metaphor, they build a bridge not with introverted sensing, which turns out they're horrible at and like completely reject, but they build it with some extroverted thinking. Not a lot, but it's still there as number 4 out of the 8 in terms of skillful use. So this ESFJ is going to be much more, and they have SE and NI like right there. So they're much more like that holistic version of ESFJ. They're on the floor, they're reading the room, they're acting quickly to notice how people are responding and what they need. Not what they need in terms of practical stuff like, are you hungry? Although they might ask about that, but is like, I have this hunch that something is going on with you, and I'm going to go and talk to you about that. It could appear in like the arts, and the like theater, for example. Having a sense of the people and being able to respond quickly to the people as things are happening right there. I think some examples could be campaign organizing, fundraising, sales leadership. It could be sales when they start. They're not going to like sales that much, so they're going to want to go into sales leadership. Again, like hospitality, but probably more in like directing events and organizing events. In any kind of crisis situation, being a liaison between different groups. So this is much more in the moment, and they're not particularly concerned about what people are expecting as the normal way of doing things, except in that extroverted feeling like, am I making sure the person is taken care of and feels comfortable. So service operations, media production, being a showrunner, for example, where you need to have vision, but you also need to be like showing up on the set and making a lot of changes as you go. So this is a much more tactically oriented type and or version. It could even be in sports, but I think performing arts is more likely. And they can be mistaken for ESFP or even ENTJ, which I know sound like almost opposite ends of things, but not really, because there's extroverted sensing that's there and introverted intuiting with a little bit of extroverted thinking. And that's the bridge. They're like, yeah, I'm going to do just enough extroverted thinking in terms of organizing timetables and making sure like resources are in the right place at the right time, but is much more in the moment, here and now, fast tempo, face to face, working the room. And that introverted intuiting is much more focused on like seeing what's going on with the person right in front of me, and responding to that quickly. And I mean, I think this is true for all ENFJs because this is sort of like classic ENFJ, with where you have like extroverted feeling, then introverted intuiting, and extroverted sensing. So taking action in the moment in order to push the vision and meet, which is usually about helping people grow and meeting their like deep psychological needs in some way. um I think that they might score as perceiving types, thus ESFP, but I think that the moment you would seat them next to an ENFP, you would quickly see the difference, because something that they're not really great at is extroverted intuiting. Just a little bit, it's sort of there in the middle ish, like the not at the very bottom, but not so good. Um, and this
Yeah.
is the person that this I would say, actually, here's a great example. The first analytic ENFJ can be like the neighborhood parent teacher organization, going to church, like following all of these SI things. And this version of the second holistic version of ENFJ is more like in the moment, tactical, countercultural, and their life might feel like a little bit of a mess, because when you have FE and SE together, that's a lot of like interpersonal drama that keeps happening in the moment. And that would be a downside in terms of stress. So whereas the first version is like, I'm living an inauthentic life, even though this is the bridge that's needed to work. The second version is more like, oh my God, I'm creating so many fires as I go, that they're creating as many fires as they put out. And then after a while, probably wondering how their vision is actually going to be met. Um, and that's as well as like not having the difficulty of like stepping back and sort of looking at things, because the introverted thinking not strong either, and saying like, wow, the gut feel that I follow in the moment and the way it's mixing in with my vision and my feeling is creating drama, rather than actually leading to the vision I have in mind, that I really want to actually help people in the long term. Um, and that's I say like that, it's in a nutshell. And I was sort of wondering like which one is analytic and which one is holistic, and now it seems pretty clear to me now that we discuss it.
Yeah, I'm glad that that was able to sort itself through us talking. And so when you mentioned ESFP, you meant ENFP, right? Like this form of ENFJ seems ENFP like, but then you see they don't have any, and then you're like, oh, you're definitely not an ENFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit, by the way. And if you talk to people who, like our Myers-Briggs certified folks who go into organizations and a rollout type, it's quite common for ENFJs, like a version of ENFJ, to score as ENFP. And then there's a point in the course of the workshop, either where they sit next to an ENFP or they start reading descriptions or something, and they're like, usually it's about interacting with an actual ENFP. That's sort of like the antidote to help test whether they're really ENFP or an ENFJ. Is like just sit them next to an actual ENFP and they're going to see the difference. Because ENFP is like ba, 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 ba. And the ENFJ is like, wow, like way too much extroverted intuiting for me. And that's that really can be a challenge. And this version, this holistic version, is like okay with extroverted intuiting. Like let's have a brainstorming session. Let's like tell some stories with each other. But it is a little bit and it's the same. Their extroverted thinking is like, let's have some checklists. Let's have some like bottom line measures, KPIs or something. I don't know. I don't concern myself with those things. But let's have some structure, but it doesn't go very far. And I think it's one of those things like INFJ, INFP, ENFJ, ENFP. That's a common like sorting question that people have.
Yeah, people tend to score 1 or 2 letters off of their type using assessments, and so, yeah, sitting next to a person of that type is really helpful for figuring out if you really are that type. So, thank you so much, Dario, for coming out and talking about these new discoveries you have and being the trailblazer for them too. And so, thanks everyone for watching. We'll also see you in the next video. So, bye.
Cheers.